Good morning, friends, and thank you all for joining for this wonderful session with Sri Ram Madhav, National General Secretary of BJP. He is talking to all Americans and also many students here who have joined live on some important questions which have intrigued all of us, and some misinformation is also there. But one thing everyone, all Americans agree that India has done a tremendous job in controlling coronavirus, and all credit goes to the leadership of which Sri Ram Madhavji is a part of it. So without delay, we are going to jump into a few questions which we had already discussed. And what is India's, what is India's response, and how it has been so successful in a large democracy like India? Listen to Sri Ram Madhavji. Thank you.
Topic of further research and study. Today, as I speak to you, about 325 districts out of close to 675 districts in India have been declared by government as green districts, green zone. Green zone technically means that there has not been a single case in the last at least 15 days in these districts. There is no positive case at all in these districts. There are about 250 other districts where the spread is very, very minimal. There were a few cases, they have been identified and they have been quarantined, and there is no further spread. Those districts are described as orange districts. Between green and orange districts, we cover 80% of India. There are about 120, 130 districts which have been categorized as red zones, where we still have active cases of COVID-19. It is here in these red zones that we see the spread or the virus spreading and newer cases coming to light on a daily basis. So while we find the number of cases going up in the country, overall the spread of it has been very effectively contained. I don't know if there is any other country with that kind of a population spread which has succeeded in containing it to just 20-25% of its territory. This has become possible because of mainly three reasons. Firstly, we are fortunate to have a government, a leader in Prime Minister Modi, who had the foresight, the vision, and the dedication to understand the seriousness of the challenge and take measures proactively on time. You probably hear from some of the critics, sometimes from Indian opposition parties also, that probably we have not taken steps on time, etc., etc. Let me tell you, the first case that was identified or located in India was on the 30th of January. On 3rd of February, the government has constituted a special task force for coronavirus. By 12th February, when we did not even have 100 cases in the country, a group of ministers was constituted to address the challenge of protecting India from this virus, containing it in the country. Please recall, on the 11th of February, the WHO was telling the whole world that coronavirus is not a contagious disease. It's not going to be transmitted humanly. This was the kind of probably that much information only they had at the time, or whatever. That was the propaganda of the WHO. Even then, even when there were not even 100 cases in India, we had taken proactive measures. We started screening all the passengers coming from China from 12th of February onwards. We have started screening all the international passengers from 3rd of March onwards. And by 3rd of March, again, as I said, we hardly had less than 200 cases. But we decided that every foreign passenger should be screened. 12th onwards, 12th of March onwards, whoever came into India was necessarily quarantined for 14 days. Special quarantine facilities were created across the country. And as you all know, on the 22nd, we had a Janata curfew, and from 25th onwards, from the midnight of 24th onwards, there was a complete lockdown. Please remember that when we announced the lockdown, the number of cases, positive cases in India was less than 400. But the decision of the Prime Minister, understanding the seriousness of this challenge, the decision to ask the country for a shutdown, it's largely voluntary, let me tell you.
That's right.
Ask the country to shut down shows his foresight, his vision. That has been a great boon for us in containing this virus.
Yes.
The second factor, let me tell you, friends, is the Indian administration. Normally, people, most of you probably who are living in other countries, would generally have a low opinion about Indian bureaucracy, Indian police, Indian system. You think that they're corrupt, they're inefficient, etc., etc. But even to us who live in this country, it came as a revelation the way they have performed during this crisis period. It's not about past tense. Even today, the way they are performing, the way they are risking their lives, the way they are working. I mean, I know of doctors and nurses who have not gone to their houses for 20 days, 21 days.
That's right.
They just remained at home.
Correct.
I know of police personnel who are working 20 hours a day, sleeping in the police stations, sleeping on the platforms, sleeping wherever they get, whenever they get time and wherever they get space. Even if they go home, they don't enter their houses, sit outside, have food, clean their utensils and return them. This kind of dedication, this kind of commitment from Indian police, Indian administration, Indian healthcare establishment, doctors, nurses, even sanitation workers was something amazing, and it has played a big role in helping us contain this virus. But friends, third and most important factor has been the support of 1.3 billion Indians.
That's right.
You know, Indians are known for indiscipline. When you find them on a street, they are very fond of violating traffic rules.
That's right.
They're very fond of, demonstrating their indiscipline. But in this case, 1.3 billion Indians have stood like one man behind our Prime Minister and our government. They followed, they demonstrated unity, they followed discipline, and they demonstrated a sort of commitment. And I tell you, India probably is the only country, and remember, it's a very big country, 1.3 billion people, only country which has not tweaked a single law to implement all this. I've seen countries, I don't want to name them, but great democracies deploying armies on the streets. Rulers wanting to usurp more powers, showing the threat of corona. India's case, no such thing had been used by Prime Minister or the government. Same existing laws. So if I were to mention only one law which was specially promulgated in last 45 days, only one. That was, in some cases, a specific group of people when they started targeting healthcare workers who came to test them, that was when government decided that there should be a special law to control these people. They are very small groups, but we needed to protect our healthcare people, our police people. So a law which would make it punishable up to 7 years of imprisonment if somebody goes and attacks the healthcare workers. Other than that, we have not used any special laws. We have not deployed army on the streets. We used the existing laws because, as I said, 1.3 billion people have stood, with some exceptions. They stood like one man behind Prime Minister. And, the challenges were very, very, very big. We needed to, India has a population of close to 140 million workers, migrant workers, 140 million, imagine. They needed food. They needed places to stay. Because of lockdown, everything was shut. Do you know that people of this country shoulder that entire responsibility? I'm a BJP leader. I'm from the RSS. Between RSS and BJP, we have fed 100 million people. Ramakrishna Mission has fed it. Dharmacharyas, religious leaders have fed it. Caste organizations, Agarwal Samaj, Jain Samaj, this Samaj, that Samaj, this temple, that temple, ISKCON. They have fed people. So nobody went hungry in the last 50 days in India. You may probably ask me the inevitable question. If that is the case, why are these migrant workers walking for miles on, hundreds of miles to reach their villages? Remember, not because of any economic reasons, not because of hunger or anything. There was an anxiety. One, there's no job, no work to do. And secondly, the anxiety about families back home. This corona, the danger, the threat. How is the family? Let me go back and stay with them. Whether it is good or bad, let me face it with my family. That anxiety has probably forced some people, a section of the migrants, to undertake a perilous journey. But I tell you, throughout that route, everywhere they were being fed, they were being given water, they were being taken care of by people. That demonstration of countries' popular preparation, popular commitment has helped us overcome this major challenge. One reason for this is people have enormous commitment, enormous respect for our leadership, Prime Minister Modi's leadership.
Absolutely.
And Prime Minister Modi has stood up to that situation. Prime Minister Modi has on a regular intervals has guided the people. He has consulted with every stakeholder, every chief minister he has spoken to. He would hold meetings with them. Even if he's not holding meetings with them, he would personally call up and find out what's happening in every single state across the parties. That's why today, when the opposition leadership comes up and tells the media that we were not being consulted, it's a total lie. Not just formal meetings. Prime Minister informally also keeps on talking to all the chief ministers. He demonstrated the united face of India. And he used our cultural, civilizational value system to educate people. Vayam Rashtre Jagruyama. This was the slogan he gave to the people in his last message. What does it mean? We as a nation should be awakened. We should be the awakened members of the nation. Let us all be awakened. He used our civilizational value system to motivate people. He wanted them to pay respects to the policemen, to the doctors, to the nurses. So he has prepared the popular mind in such a way that we are able to today, together with government, administration and popular support, we have been able to tide over this crisis in a big way. I'm not saying we are completely free of it. We have challenges, but I can tell you, we are confident that we would be able to come out less bruised compared to many countries. I don't wish bad for any country, but general comparison if you make, we seem to be managing our affairs very well. Just one thing I mention and close, then I can probably take your questions. There were aberrations. There were groups which refused to follow this discipline. Tablighi Jamaat could have avoided that March 2nd week conference. It was very unfortunate. Why I'm saying this specially was exactly on those dates, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th of March, we had our Holi. 9th was Holi, 8th was the day before Holi, when the entire country erupts in celebration. But Prime Minister just gave one call. Look, it is a difficult time. Let's celebrate it in a private manner in our houses. The whole country followed the suit. Prime Minister himself said, I will celebrate it in my house. You please do that. We abandoned the celebrations, public celebrations of Holi. In between came Hindu New Year, Gudi Padwa came. Festivals came in Assam, in Tamil Nadu, Kerala. Everybody decided to celebrate it privately. So much so that RSS had its annual conclave scheduled for 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th of March. And normally a disciplined organization like RSS never cancels events. For the first time, they cancelled their national conclave. Because there was that need for country to follow certain discipline. But then a group decided that no, we will go ahead. They could have done better. That had led to definitely, I'm not saying whatever is there in India is today because of Tablighi Jamaat. That's a very wrong thing to say. But they could have behaved more responsibly. So it has created some kind of an unhappiness in the country, in the minds of the people. That why this group has created so much problem for sections of the country. But beyond that, nobody responsible in the country has actually made it into any communal Hindu-Muslim issue. When we are fighting against coronavirus, we are fighting like one nation. That is the spirit of Indian culture. There is no communal angle in it. There is no Hindu-Muslim in it. We are all together. And this is not a statement that I am making. It is actually there is a proof. There was a survey recently which showed that 94% of the people of India are supporting the actions of Honorable Prime Minister. What does it mean? 94% people means there are Muslims included, Christians included, everybody included, then only it will be 94%.
Great.
That is the reality of India. In this fight, we are all together. It's no Hindu-Muslim fight. There is no Islamic phobia in India. Because of one group, there was anger against that group. If that group is somebody else, that anger would have been against that somebody else.
Yes.
We never ever look at these things in any communal angle. But unfortunately, such kind of propaganda is being unleashed because today Prime Minister Modi his stature is going up. He is being seen as a very visionary type of leader by many leaders in the world. So some people, when they call it Islamophobia in India, I tell them two things. Remember, phobia is it comes only when you are exposed to something new. Islam has been integral to Indian life for 1400 years. If there was any phobia, it would have been there 1400 years ago, not after 1400 years of living together. Number two, those who talk about Islamic phobia, actually they have a phobia called Modi phobia.
Correct.
They are suffering from that phobia, so they propagate that there is some other phobia in India. There is no phobia. Indians are united. We are fighting this battle very effectively in India. We are helping the world. We are giving pharmaceuticals and other support to we have given it to more than 85 countries. But that as a duty. In fact, Prime Minister strictly told us that never to claim any credit for whatever you do. Because this is a duty. Our Sanatana Dharma teaches us that when there is a crisis to the humanity, it's a duty to stand up for the good of the humanity. Then you don't want any credit for it. So he told us clearly, never to say which countries you are supplying what, no public statement, no media statement. So you probably have not come across a single statement by any minister in the government. Because the principle is, it's not something that you propagate, it is You do something as your dharma, as your duty. So friends, that is where we stand today. I appeal to all of you only one thing. India is in safe hands. Don't worry about India. But as people who love India, who love this great nation, great culture, great civilization, please use your energy, your influence to spread good word about our country and its efforts to tackle this challenge. Today, there are many people, most of you are probably living in America. You open New York Times, all sorts of rubbish you will find about India. You open Washington Post, all sorts of rubbish. Probably even Indian diaspora people probably would be getting influenced by that kind of propaganda. You, as responsible community members, I urge you to tell our country, our own diaspora members, and also our friends in American society that see, India is in safe hands. India is the only shining example of democracy today, liberal democracy today. One country which has not tweaked a single law in all these crises. So it is going to be an example for the coming world. It is going to be a leader in the future world. I would urge all of you to please shoulder that responsibility. And I'm thankful for this opportunity to connect with you all. I will be with you for some time to take your questions. Thank you and namaskar.
Namaskar, Ram Madhavji. So on behalf of the all group, we had more than 3,000 questions. Like we cannot ask you 3,000. So there are a few things you mentioned in your talk very, very well. Number one is India is not suffering from Islamophobia. That's a number one thing. We have another term we use in the US is called that some of them are suffering from kafir phobia. So we are not Islamophobic, but they are kafir phobic. Another point is on the education side, you mentioned the beauty of Sanatan Dharma and how Sanatan Dharma has evolved. So one of the questions is by many people is a common question, why the Ministry of Education is not working on exporting Sanatan Dharma? And you can answer all these questions in one answer, so I'll ask you third one also in the same line it is. The Western media, particularly Washington Post, New York Post, and these are, we call them libtards, the liberal retardish media houses of fake news, which President Trump calls them fake news channels. Now, they regularly publish atrocity literatures, which means that they publish articles against India on caste system, on Islamophobia, their propaganda on Islamophobia. So Islamic leftist doctrine is controlling these institutions. So the question from the audience was, a common question, many questions were asked, was that what does Indian government can do to stop this? Because it is not in the power of many American Hindus to do that, because these games are played at the government level. Qatar is funding it, and the other foreign governments are funding it. So as American Hindus, we cannot even protest against them because we have no visibility there. American Hindus are the richest community in the United States, more richer than the Jews today. But so far we have not had the political positions in the US government which are truly Sanatan Dharmi. We did not have. So how can Indian government, being a larger entity, can help American Hindus in that regard?
Look, as far as the education part is concerned, we need to make a lot of changes in the education system in India itself, first of all, before we think in terms of exporting it to other countries. We still need to reform our system, introduce many important good things about our culture, our civilization, our value system in Indian education system itself. There was one attempt made during Vajpayeeji's government, but that was reversed after the government fell. But now under Prime Minister Modi, a new education policy is being drafted. The draft is ready. It was to be basically passed by the Indian cabinet, Indian Council of Ministers. But this challenge came, this Corona crisis came. I hope that once we are out of this challenge, the government will turn its attention to reforms in education. Subsequently, of course, these educational values have to be spread to different countries in the world. But having said it, let me just remind to all of you, the Indian value system, we are always very keen to take it to the entire world. Prime Minister has himself championed the cause of spreading the awareness about yoga in the world. The initiative that he took has made yoga a most in thing in the world today. Today, that Indian traditional health care system of yoga is very fashionable in the world. When I say in the world, not just in the Western world. I know, I mean, we host events for soft power diplomacy. We get a lot of yoga practitioners from the Middle East. We have very good yoga teachers from Saudi Arabia who speak fluent Sanskrit, who teach people in Saudi Arabia, in many other countries. So he has taken yoga to the universal global stage. Similarly, we are now trying to tell the world that it is not enough to be talking about developing the science of disease or cure. You need to talk about the science of life, and that is Ayurveda. Ayurveda, the very name, means it is not science of disease, it is science of life. If you know how to live your life in a disciplined way, there is no need for bothering about diseases. So that Ayurvedic healthcare system, we call it Ayush. In that we take medical systems like Siddha also, Homeo also, Unani also. So different non-Western medical systems we are promoting, especially Ayurveda and Siddha. These things also we are promoting. So we are taking the value system to the world. And let me just end by saying that Prime Minister in the last about 6 years' time, he has traveled to more than, I think close to 80, 90 countries. One gift he presented to every leader in the world was Bhagavad Gita.
That's right.
So he did not carry any exotic things, other exotic things. The most exotic thing is this knowledge in the form of Bhagavad Gita. So we are trying our best to take this value system to the entire world. But as far as education in India is concerned, we are working on reforming it.
So one
see,
more...
media, there is no immediate answer. These media houses are big. They are influential in the sense that they are the ones which are read by all the important policy makers in the world. Whether they are sitting in London or sitting in Paris or sitting in Washington, they read New York Times, they read Wall Street Journal, they read Washington Post. We cannot simply ignore them also. So there has to be an effort to tell them the right thing. But again, as you rightly pointed out, the challenge is that the people sitting there are already, they have certain preconceived notions about India and its leadership. So how do we tackle it? To the extent possible, educate people with our own alternate efforts.
So very good point, Minister and Shriram Madhavji. Now, another question is asked by commonly across the entire audience, and I'm just going to ask the gist of it. So you can answer it or you can skip it. It's up to you. So what has the government done on delimitation, rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits, and also the stopping of slain terrorist death processions? And this is a very common question, so I have to just ask you from the audience.
Yes, you see, as far as the Kashmiri Pandits are concerned, we have made a number of efforts to help the community members return to their home state, namely, even home region, I would say, the Kashmir Valley. For example, we have created 7,000 different types of government jobs, including teacher posts. exclusively for Pandit community. I can tell you the fact of the matter is we are unable to fill them up. Not because there is full employment among the Pandits. Unless you create security and dignity for them in the valley, what help is a job? When they go there, if they are not secure, if they are hounded out, if they are, humiliated, how does it help? So the challenge for us in the government today is to create an atmosphere in Kashmir Valley where Pandits can go back with dignity, honor, and security.
That's right.
That is the challenge we are addressing. Towards achieving that kind of an atmosphere, first of all, we have done away with this 370 article. Today, Jammu and Kashmir is fully an integral part of India. Gradually, but definitely the situation will change there. I can tell you because I have been handling the party affairs in the state for more than 5 years in the state now.
Yes.
The kind of protests we used to witness in the past, in 2016, 2017, when Burhan Wani was killed, the kind of protests that we used to witness, compared those days with the 3 years down the line in 2020 or 2019 when we removed Article 370 in August, it is, I would say, it is the most peaceful phase. Because today we don't find that kind of protests at all. 10,000 people coming onto the streets, pelting stones at the police and all that. Sporadic incidents happen. I'm not denying that nothing is happening. I'm not saying nothing is happening. Sporadic incidents happen, but in terms of its intensity, in terms of its numbers, it's very, very less compared to what it used to be in the past. That gives us the confidence that things are changing in Kashmir Valley. Remember, the real guarantee for Kashmiri Pandits is a conducive, peaceful atmosphere in Kashmir Valley. We are working towards that. Other than that, we have had plans to build townships in 5 places in the valley. There was an issue whether the township for Pandits should be an exclusive township for Pandits or it should be a mixed one. All those issues could not be resolved, but all such measures are possible, but they won't help solve the problem fully. Having said it, I will just give you one piece of information, just for the sake of information. We already have close to 8,000-9,000 Pandit families living in Kashmir Valley, even in villages. They are there. More have to go back.
That's right. Thank you. Now, one common question is one of the things, and you have done a tremendous work. I was going through your website and your articles and everything. Saving temples, bringing temples out of government control. That is one issue. And the secondly, we all wish POK becomes part of India, including Gilgit-Baltistan. These are wish and hope. And so on saving temples or bringing temples out of government control, which is a big concern for many American Hindus. This point was raised by Shobha Chokalingam. She's our director. And so the last question was also combined with Sharad Mohan, who is also director of A4H. So now, what is your opinion on that or view on that, please?
You see, this issue has many facets to it. While in principle, we are all committed to the idea that temples should be left to the community to manage. There are certain practical issues that need to be kept in mind. For your information, in India, there are a good number of temples which are privately managed, privately run. They are not government-controlled temples. They are there in different states in India. There are private temples also. Under Indian Constitution, management of temples is a subject for the state governments. So, Government of India cannot promulgate any laws with respect to whether a given temple should be in government control or private control. That's not allowed because each state controls its own temples.
That's
So any amendment to it should happen at state level. In each state, it has to happen.
That's right.
But you also must remember that we have certain very successful models of, I mean, just for the sake of understanding, I'm using this phrase. Don't use it in your writings and all. A PPP model,
That's right.
where there is government also, community also together. Take the case of Vaishnav Devi temple in Jammu, the second richest temple in India. After Tirupati, the second richest temple in India is Vaishnav Devi. And Vaishnav Devi temple is run by a trust of people independent who come from all over the country. Only governor of the state is the head of the trust. Otherwise, those trustees are, कोई एक vice chancellor है, कोई एक बड़ा doctor है. They are all from different walks of life and different parts of the country. So effectively run today. There are helicopter services. There are good roads. There are excellent. They run an excellent medical college and hospital. So such models are also possible. On the other hand, we have private temples which are languishing in courts because two groups fight for control over the temple. So we have number of facets to this issue. What we need to do is we have to come up with a model where there is no government control, but there is a sort of regulation where government and eminent people, all of them work together. When Swami Dayananda Saraswati of Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, some of you probably would have heard about him, probably would have met him also. When he was there, we actually worked on a good model. There was a model prepared for how to manage temples where some element of government role also will be there, but broadly community helps, community runs them. Unfortunately, Swamiji is no more. I definitely agree that we need to work on a model where public takes major role in running the affairs of the temple.
Thank you so much. There is a one question which people have asked right now. Is one of the things is excuse me just a minute. There is somebody. Okay, so one question people are asking, mostly Americans, is given the good relations of Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump, and also India has provided those necessary vaccines and the medicines to the US. Now, this is the time for Indian government to take a more proactive, strategic role to bring the relationship of India and the US to a much higher level. So, so what is your point on that? Like, for example, Afghanistan. Afghanistan is one area where India can play a more proactive role. And another thing is Bangladesh, where India can play a more proactive role. And obviously in South China Sea, India can play a more proactive role. I leave it up to you what parts you want to answer. And because you are a thinker of the BJP as well. So I leave it up to you, this answer.
Look, Atal Bihari Vajpayee described US and India as natural allies.
That's right.
We have to be together. It is nature's mandate for us. And in this relationship, you all play a very important role. The 3 million or probably more than 3 million strong Indian diaspora is an integral part of US-India relationship. On both sides, on India's side as well as on the US side, this relationship has always been bipartisan. Whoever is in power in either of the country, this relationship is bound to go places, is bound to further get strengthened, because we share a number of common, we share a common vision on a number of issues. We are both committed to democratic values. We are both committed to erasing terrorism from the face of the earth. We are committed to a rule-based order in the world. And we have common challenges, whether in the form of authoritarian regimes or Islamic terrorist regimes. Our challenges are common. So our two countries are bound to sail together. I'm not using the other side, sink together. We won't sink, we'll only sail together. So this relationship will only grow further. Other issues are strategic issues. There is no doubt we work together on those issues, whether it is South China Sea or India's neighborhood. Let me tell you one thing. Global power axis has today moved away from the Pacific Atlantic region to Indo-Pacific region.
That's right.
In the last century, the power axis was situated somewhere between Europe, Western Europe, and America. But no longer today, because the countries with big populations, big purchasing power, big economies are all situated in the Indo-Pacific region. Indo-Pacific region sees 70% of the global container trade passing through it. The most happening region today. In this region, India and US are important partners. If we abandon our responsibility, if we don't work together, you can imagine who will control this region. I don't want to name any single country, but you all are learned people. So the new challenges of geopolitics also demand that we two countries work together. I can only say this much to you, that on all those issues that you mentioned, and on many more issues, we both countries work together. We have a perfect understanding. We share information. We coordinate with each other in our moves. For example, on Afghanistan, we regularly coordinate with the Americans. In fact, Mr. Jalmay Khalilzad, who is again a personal friend of mine also, he is in India today. Right now, he is in India. He had a meeting with our foreign minister, brief him about the America's efforts to find a solution to Afghan Taliban issue. So we are constantly kept in the loop on Afghanistan issue. On issues like Bangladesh, South China Sea, we take a proactive stand, and the US is with us. So we both work in tandem. So that much of understanding is there between our two countries. But at no point in time does India want any of its bilateral relationships to be seen as against any third country. So we follow, in diplomatic terms, we call it as de-hyphenated foreign policy. De-hyphenation means my friendship with a given country should not be seen by any third country is against their interests. That is called de-hyphenated. We are not hyphenating our relationship against somebody. So that's how we look at it's a strategic thing. We follow that policy.
We want to congratulate you on your work in Bengal. You've done a very good work in Bengal. And also, we really appreciate your efforts in spreading the Sanatan Dharma culture. Now, if you have time, we can take one more question. Otherwise, we'll have vote of thanks. And
I can be up to 9:30 India time. That is about another 9 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So I will have a quick vote of thanks, 1 minute vote of thanks from Dr. Japra. Please go ahead.
Am I unmuted? You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Namaskar, Ram Madhavji. One more time, on behalf of all the Hindus worldwide, we'd love to thank you very, very much. I think it was very, very insightful, very informative, and very enlightening. What you told us today, there were a lot of questions in the minds and hearts of all the Hindus all over the world, and you answered many of them. Of course, there's going to be always some more questions, which hopefully we'll get to another time because of the lack of time. We cannot address all the questions. But one more time, we want to show our support on behalf of all the Hindus worldwide. We want to make sure that we, from outside, can help you as much as you would like us to do. I know Modi ji's has been all over. He was here in our Silicon in America and many other parts of the world as well. and he's done a wonderful job doing the great PR, not only with American Hindus or worldwide Hindus, but also with the governments of various countries, and especially this relationship between President Trump and President Modi has been wonderful, and we want to make sure that this can keep going further, and we become the ambassadors to take this relationship further. So what we are planning to do here, not only empower our American Hindus politically, economically, socially, culturally, and dharma-wise. Of course, dharma is the base for everything, and that's what we believe in: the Sanatana Dharma and our dharma, and our Hinduism, our philosophy, our ideology, our values. We want to expand, promote, advocate, not only amongst Hindus, but also amongst all the other religions and all the other communities who will benefit from our Hinduism. So that is one of her things. One of the questions which keeps coming up from everyone out here is the Hindu Rashtra. You know, every community, every country has this dream that they can go back to their Matribhumi. So that question, I know it's difficult, but this is one of the things which we can take upon as outsiders. We have no problem. We don't have any fear from any other communities or any other groups who are, whether they're pseudo-Hindus, whether they're Islamists, whether they belong to any other communities out there who have been against us, the media or the fake media. We don't have any fear from those people, and we can bring this revolution from outside. Just like the Gadar happened in 1857, right from in my neighborhood here, with Gadri Babas in the valley here. We can bring this revolution back to India as long as we have the support of all the people back home, our brothers and sisters. Dhanyabad one more time, and I think if you can answer this question, I know it's a difficult question. Everybody's been asking about it. What about Hindu Rashtra, so that we can have a sense of belonging no matter where we are?
Look, India is culturally and civilizationally is always a Hindu Rashtra. It's only the challenge is to make people realize it. How do we all make our people realize that, this is value system and cultural civilizational value system that we all should imbibe and we all should live up to. The challenge is not about declaring it as Hindu Rashtra. It has always been a Hindu Rashtra. The challenge is how do you make people realize it? That is where not government, but non-governmental organizations like RSS, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, all of you, even every committed Hindu, every conscientious Hindu should be making efforts. We are all making efforts. So many ashrams, so many dharmacharyas. Yesterday morning, we had a meeting with all the prominent dharmacharyas of the country. They are all united today. There never was this kind of unity before. But now the dharmacharyas, the heads of traditional mutts and all are all together. So the combined effort of all of us should lead to the society realizing that Hindu-ness. That is what is Hindu Rashtra. It's not a physical state. It's an emotional state. It's a civilizational value system that the country has to adopt. Yeah, towards that, whatever government needs to do, we are doing. Chaliye, thank you all on that positive note. Let me thank you and congratulate you for your enthusiasm and commitment for the good of the country. And namaskar to all of you.
Namaskar, and Ram Madhavji, a vote of thanks from Sharad Mohan, from Shobha Chokalingam, and Shailja Singh, Sumana Rao, and Subroto Gangopadhyay. These are the people who worked, and also overseas friends of BJP. They worked with us. Virat Hindustan Sangam, our Dr. Swami worked with us, and also other organizations, especially our Sathology Foundation, which is working on to fight the mythology tag on Vedic scriptures in USA. So from all of us, thanks. And I may have missed out many communities in Bay Area, and Harsh Sharma and many people there in Bay Area, as well as New York, Texas, North Carolina, Chicago. There are many people from all over the country joined. So all of us give thanks to you, and we want to invite you once a month to speak to all of us. I'm sure you'll have a much bigger audience with us. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you and namaskar.
Expressing gratitude to all the people who participated today in the live discussion with Sri Ram Madhavji, the National General Secretary of BJP. We at Sathology, we try to oppose a mythological tag against the Vedic scriptures, Sanatana Dharma, and it is our endeavor to bring out the most truthful information to concern with the Vedic scriptures, Ramayana, Mahabharata, which are all Sathology, to all of you. This is a recorded session being live, so please do comment on the video, share it with your friends, and join the group, join the movement, and also you join the A4H, Americans for Hindus movement, which is at the grassroots level in USA. Thank you and namaskar.